Chapter 12 Den of Thieves. The funny thing about the weather in Hyrule was that if it was sunny outside, it was going to be sunny for at least a few days, and the same stood for when it was raining. The storm continued on through the night, and the next morning when the sun came up, the sky was covered with thick black clouds that showed no sign of breaking up anytime soon. This also meant that there was no point in waiting to go after the next chest, so Link tried not to wake the still sleeping Impa as he gathered his things. Aghanim was nowhere to be found, aside from a note on his bedroll that read, "Went to Lizard Mine," meaning that the young man's destination was what the old woman called Lion Fortress. He was familiar with the place, and knew where the only entrance was, but it was not a place that he would consider a fortress. Well, at least not in the traditional sense. Maybe once upon a time it was something grand, but these days it was nothing but a ruin that had become so overgrown that it made Crescent Tower look like it was in pristine condition. Before he and Aghanim destroyed it, that is. There were a few pieces of the old stone walls left, but only because they were held up by the large trees whose trunks and vines had wrapped around them, creating a massive wall of trees that could almost be missed entirely if someone didn't know what to look for. Managing to get dressed and ready without disturbing the old woman, Link was thankful to have his hat as he stepped out of the cave, but soon it was soaked along with the rest of him, leaving no point to it. Thankfully, the fortress in question was only a short distance to the south from the cave, but the bad news was that it had been taken over by a gang of thieves a few years ago, and was now a major base for them. This was also why Aghanim had chosen the other place, since he looked nothing like the sort of person who would be found inside, whereas Link looked exactly like them. Moving deeper into the forest, the thick canopy of leaves gave him a break from the pouring rain, but it also meant that he was getting closer to the fortress. He wasn't worried about being recognized, since thieves from all over southern Hyrule passed through here to offload stolen goods, and usually just knowing the way to get in was enough to prove that you were okay to be there. So, after about 15 minutes of walking, he came to a very large and thick cusp of trees that didn't look like anything special aside from how big around it was. The entrance was to the far south, so he made his way around and came to a large stump that was just kind of sitting against the edge of the tree wall. Pushing it to the side with all his strength, the roots and vines attached to it had just enough give for it to reveal a tunnel that had been cut right through the trees behind it. This was also how the entrance stayed hidden after it was used. Those same roots and vines pulled it back into place once he had crawled into the tunnel. He was already soaked, so he didn't mind crawling across the damp ground, and now that he was inside, he had to come up with a plan. Assuming that the next chest looked like the first one that was left with Impa, he would have to act like a potential buyer and just kind of browse around until he found it. It was a simple plan, but probably also the most likely to work as he neared the end of the tunnel, so all he needed to do was act like he wasn't doing anything wrong, and this would be easy. Finally, the tunnel ended, and Link was annoyed by the return of the falling rain as he crawled out of it. But then he forgot all about both the rain and his plan when he got to his feet and saw what was waiting for him. There was no one. Well, there were people around. In fact, they were all around the fortress, but they were all dead. A perfectly timed lightning flash revealed to him that all of the thieves, men and women, were dead, their bodies on the ground with faces twisted in expressions of horror. This was unsettling, to say the least, as was the fact that all of them were armed, with their weapons laying on the ground next to each one. It also appeared that most of them had died in different ways, some stabbed to death while others appeared to have been crushed. Another crash of thunder made the young man jump, and then his brain finally began working, telling him to find cover before whoever or whatever killed all these people came back. There were a few stone rooms still standing, so he ducked inside what was left of one, with the body on the floor telling him that he was not the first to seek shelter there. Nothing appeared to be moving when he looked back out into the main area from behind the crumbling wall, but the falling rain made it a little hard to listen. Of course, there was the chance that whoever had done this was long gone, and he started to believe this after several more minutes of nothing happening. Hopefully this was the case, and hopefully they didn't find the chest he was after when they left, because he had no other way to find it. The young man was about to begin searching when his eyes fell upon a beautiful steel sword. Something like that would probably be more effective than his boomerang if the killer was still there, but he also felt kind of awkward taking the weapon from a dead man. Another flash of lightning helped him make up his mind when it revealed the shadow of someone tall standing behind him, so he reflexively grabbed the weapon, spun around, and then felt like a fool when he saw what he was pointing the blade at. It was a stone statue, quite a bit taller and wider than him, but it was the shape that had startled him like that. It was shaped like a knight with a horned helmet, wielding a shield and spear, and the body became a flat, round base, just below where the legs started. It must have been a new acquisition, because Link didn't remember seeing it the last time he was there, but then again, that was quite some time ago. Tapping the statue with the tip of his newfound sword, the young man was relieved when it made the tink-tink-tink of solid stone. Jumping again as thunder crashed, he quickly looked around to make sure that no one was sneaking up on him, but then he froze when he heard a low rumbling sound from next to the statue. Turning back towards it, he expected to be attacked by someone behind it, but then his mind barely registered that the statue itself was suddenly moving. If Link had not flailed his arms out of fright at that exact moment, the statue's spear would have pierced his heart during its sudden attack, but instead it impacted the small shield, knocking the young man off of his feet. Link tried to keep his balance, but the force of the blow, along with the wet terrain, made that impossible, and he found himself on his back just as the statue seemed to leap into the air. With just barely enough time to roll out of the way, the whole place shook when the statue landed, and the young man swallowed hard as he realized what had happened to the people there. The Stone Knight wasted no time in continuing the attack, swinging the spear sideways, and the young man felt a stinging sensation across his face as he rolled away again. This time not stopping until he was a good distance away, he scrambled to his feet and found blood on his hand after touching his cheek. This angered him, and he was about to attack the statue as it seemed to bounce its way towards him. But then he remembered all of the people, dozens of people there, who had been killed by this whatever it was, even though they were armed and outnumbered it. So Link backed off, and while the statue was slowly chasing him, he constantly scanned the area to find something that might be more effective. However, none of the blades or clubs that he found seemed like they would do much against this kind of enemy, so all he could do was keep retreating from it, until he got to the very back of the open area, where a strange scene awaited him. There was a man, not stabbed or crushed like the others, but dead just the same. He was hanged, obviously, from the rope around his neck, but his arms and legs were anchored to the ground by other ropes on some kind of pulley system. Whatever this was all designed to do, it must have been awful judging by the strangled look on the man's face, and the other remarkable thing about this was that he was naked. All of this together meant that either this man had made everyone here really, really angry, or he wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. Meanwhile, the statue was getting closer, so Link was about to move on, when he noticed one final thing behind the dead man. There was a suit of armor behind him, in pieces, as if it had been carelessly thrown there after being pulled off of him. There was also a sword, a small shield like the one Link wore, and a small chest with the emblem of the royal family. He was about to go for it, but was stopped when the statue tossed its spear, landing right in front of him. The young man grabbed the weapon, but the statue stopped him from using it by grabbing the spear with one hand and backhanding him with the other. The blow easily knocked him down, and he was just barely able to avoid the next stab of the statue's spear. This time, Link grabbed the weapon and kicked at the statue in an attempt to throw it off balance, but only succeeded in hurting his foot. The statue then dropped its shield in order to grab him by the ankle, making the young man scream as it effortlessly tossed him through the air. He collided with the hanging man, who had obviously been the scout sent by Princess Zelda, and the impact had enough force to knock the rope off of the branch that had been suspending both it and the scout. Link kept going until he crashed into where the armor had been stored, but the scout's body fell on top of the pursuing statue, distracting it long enough for the young man to grab. It was only going to take a moment for the statue to free itself from the body and falling ropes, so Link had to make a choice. He had never been one to run from a fight, so his first thought was to grab the scout's armor to use it while he found a way to defeat this monster. On the other hand, though, everyone laying on the ground had also tried to fight, and there was more at stake here than just his pride. Besides, he could always get one of those explosives from Aghanim and come back, so he grabbed the chest and ran. He could hear the statue giving chase almost immediately, and now it was moving a lot faster than before. It was getting closer, and the ground was slippery from the rain, but the young man didn't look back as he sprinted toward the small tunnel he had used to come in. Clutching the chest, he dove for it, sliding into the long tunnel just before the statue was going to reach him. Now he could hear leaves rustling as it stabbed with its spear and branches snapping as it continued to jump after him. Thankfully, it slowed the statue down enough for Link to reach the end of the tunnel, and after pushing past the stump that blocked the entrance, he took off running through the forest, while the statue still tried to get through.